Now, there's a show, MTV Decoded, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it. It's like a little hipster MTV show that talks about social issues in an incredibly liberal, non-critical way. But one of the episodes caught my attention after somebody sent it to me. They were kind of discussing class, and class happens to be my forte. More specifically, they claimed that the poor in America are basically the same as the poor around the world. In other words, the American poor are the same as the global poor. But I don't want to put too much of my words in their mouth, so let me give you exactly what they said.
There are 1.5 million American households living on less than $2 per person a day. That's below the global extreme poverty line. 13 million children in America live in households that lack the means to get enough nutritious food on a regular basis. And they live much shorter lives.
Now, obviously, comparing first world poor to third world poor is absolutely ridiculous if you're going to make the claim that they're somehow similar. Now, I want to answer what she's saying here, but she doesn't actually give an argument for what she's saying. However, in the sources, she does link to a book that makes the claim that there's Americans living on only $2 a day, which is the same thing as the global poverty line. See, now, I went ahead and went and got a hold of the book because it was only $1.49 for Kindle. So for less than $2, which is apparently what a lot of Americans are only making a day, I was able to purchase the book and go over the argument that they make in it, and there are actually some very severe flaws in it. So what can we really take from this? Where's the mistake here? Well, they say 4%, some odd 4%, of all households with children live at this kind of poverty level. Now, for a moment, we're going to assume that this poverty level is actually real. I'll get to that in a minute. But even if it was, 4% of all households with children, that's statistically insignificant. I mean, that's hardly comparable to the third world, where you would have 50 or 60% of the population living at that kind of global level poverty. So even comparing the two is simply ridiculous. Now, when they calculate household incomes, you notice they use the word cash income a lot. Or cash-like benefits. So with things like the Affordable Care Act, things like food banks don't count because they don't come in the form of cash. And these are benefits that you would get in a first world country that you wouldn't get in a third world country. True, some third world countries have a universal health care, like the socialist ones, like Cuba or the DPRK. But let's talk about the capitalist poverty, which is the vast majority of it, which is very different. But to even say that, well, technically it's not cash, so therefore it doesn't count as a benefit, and so therefore it's the same as third world poverty, is frankly ridiculous. Because even the poorest Americans have benefits of living in the first world that even middle class people in the third world don't have. So you can see how they kind of stacked it so that if it doesn't technically count as a cash income, then therefore it doesn't count towards the $2 a day. Now it says roughly over 3 million children were surviving on cash incomes of no more than $2 per person per day in any given month, which means that it's not a chronic thing for individuals. It is a chronic problem that exists in poverty in general in the United States, but not individually. Usually a person falls into this category and then eventually comes out of it. Whereas like this kind of poverty is a permanent state for billions of people around the world. This is not a temporary situation as it is according to their own information. And that's another false equivalent, a ongoing lifelong problem compared to one that happens occasionally, at least once in a person's life, if they fall into this particular demographic. And first world poverty of this type, people still live in homes, with obviously the exception of people who are homeless. Now, they're talking about this poverty, and the examples that they give in the book are people who still live in buildings, and in many cases still pay rent, but somehow their rent is less than of the $2 a day per person that they got, which doesn't really make sense to me. Because they can do a lot of things that poor people in the third world can't do, like live in a relative's house rent-free, unless they're living in a shack which doesn't pay any rent, which is the reality for the vast majority of people who live in the third world. Barangays, barrios, shanty towns, that's where the global poor of $2 a day are actually living. places which don't even have any rent because they're corrugated iron shacks. And again, to make this comparison, it is the exception in the United States that people live homeless, as opposed to this level of living is the rule in many cases across the third world. So even their own examples that they give in the book, and that's what most of the book actually is, anecdotal evidence, they still live in homes, but this is their example of $2 a day. And another great example is access to clean water. You know, what is it? 12% of the world's population uses 95% of the world's clean water. And of course, this is the first world. It's not the third world. And that's a huge problem. Even a homeless person in the United States can still go to a park and use a water fountain that has clean water. Now, I know the first thing that's going to come out of your head is Flint, Michigan, and the ongoing crisis that's been going there. But the crisis in Flint, Michigan is the exception, not the rule. This isn't the way people live all the time through history, for years, through decades. Flint, Michigan is a rare exception to the rule, not the rule itself. Whereas in the third world, drinking unclean water is a daily occurrence for the majority of the population in a country. Now, this doesn't even count things like not having infrastructure, still having paved roads, various institutions that people can still go to. There are many poverty programs in the United States. Even the United States, which is bad for poverty programs, is still better than what you would find in the vast majority of third world countries. So for MTV to just say that, well, basically the poverty in America is the same as third world poverty is absolutely false. This book that they're actually taking it from is absolutely false in this regard. Now, that is not to say that there's no poverty in the first world. Now, that is not to say that poverty doesn't suck. Of course it does. I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm not saying there's no poverty. But the point is that American poverty is not the same thing as global poverty. These are two completely different things. However, it is an ongoing trend among first worldists, never mind liberals like MTV, to try to portray America, the wealthiest country in the world, who carries out the most crimes against people around the world, as somehow victims of the global order, when frankly such a claim is ridiculous. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.